Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Hudson with Accessible to Pursuits podcast. As always, we're blessed to have my brother Greg Trainer on. It's one of those unique opportunities. We get to highlight people all over the country that are continuing to get back to life, regardless of whatever situations may come. And we have one of the special guests on that we've known for years, a guy named Mac Brackenrich. I'm gonna introduce him here in a second, but Greg, man, how are you guys doing today up in the PA?
Man, I'm doing really well. Our weather is finally warmed up. It's in the 80s today, and we're getting a little bit of grass cut around the house here. So it's a good day to be up and about. And Mike, when you said about we want to recognize certain people and special people, I want to take the opportunity and make sure we recognize you today because today's a big day for you. It's your alive day. You've been injured 30 years today, and a lot of our friends, Mike, we've lost. We don't get to celebrate anniversaries like that, so I want to make sure we recognize this and let people know that you've been struggling with quadriplegia for 30 years. And brother, I'm proud to know you. I love you. I'm proud to call you my brother, and I want to celebrate 30 years on this earth with you. Everything you do for others, I so appreciate you.
Man, you trying to choke me up early this morning, man. It's one of those things, dude. When we first get hurt, the doctors always talk about it could take some years off your life. Spinal cord years are tough years. Man, it's hard to believe how fast 30 years have flown by. And you don't recognize it till you look in the mirror and you're like, man, where did all that gray come from? But
Oh,
man, I truly appreciate you saying that. And I, it's outlets like this, man, being able to celebrate with you and Mac and just seeing how life still goes on. And it's not ideal, right? None of us wanted to get hurt. None of us volunteered for the hurt. But each and every day we get an opportunity just to say, I'm gonna get up, God, whatever you want to do with me today is what we're gonna do. And we go on. We do the best we can. But I appreciate you doing that, Greg. I really do.
and I'm so glad to have you here. It's been 26 years for me, and as you said, time goes really fast. We try to occupy our days. We try to advocate for people, and it seems like yesterday sometimes that I was in the ER and on a helicopter getting life flighted, and everything we've been through, I think just makes us that much stronger. But glad to celebrate this day with you. And Mac, what's going on down in West Virginia, brother?
Well, it's finally quit raining and able to get outside finally from the cold weather and the rain.
Well, you're looking good down there, man. We
Man,
we joke around and talk about years, and you make it look good, man. That walking quadriplegia, you make it look really good.
I do my best. I don't like I said, I'm only 7 years in now, so I'm way behind you guys, but it's it's a struggle no matter what, and you just have to figure out how to do it.
Absolutely. And Mac, we've had you on, different podcasts before, our Accessible Hunter podcast, and we really wanted to have you on our Accessible Pursuits podcast because you're doing so much as far as employment, as far as betterment of yourself. For those folks that haven't heard your story before, do you want to tell a little bit about your background and introduce yourself and maybe how you became a quadriplegic?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, my name is Mac Brackenrich. I'm 29 years old. I've been injured 7 years, and I'm a C 4, 5, 6, and 7 incomplete quadriplegic. Before my injury, I was a firefighter, volunteer firefighter in my local community. Did EMS for a little while, and then eventually went into law enforcement, where I spent 2 years as a patrolman and canine handler. Um, and my injury came from an off-duty um, shooting accident where I was put in a bad situation and at the wrong place at the wrong time with some people that I thought were my friends and I turned out not to be. So Um, it's been a very eye-opening journey since then, and I'm still really happy to be here and go through the world of the paraplegic, quadriplegic life, and the struggles have been more or less humbling.
Yeah. It's one of those things, Mac. I didn't realize I've been hurt longer than you've been alive, man. But we joke around. We got to share some of the same backstory. Both of us were in law enforcement, and just about your injury and the way you got paralyzed. Um, Man, you've done a lot in those 7 years that you've been paralyzed. I know um, some of the people know about your story, but archery, that was huge. Tell them a little bit about what else you got going on, man, with that logo behind you.
Archery was the first step. After the archery thing, I started training canines with my first business. I did civilian and law enforcement search and rescue canines.
Right.
After that, I kind of went into the private investigation and process service field, and I still do that a little bit here and there. Um, got out of the dog world for a little while and started down a journey into what is now the logo behind me, which is BSquared Gunsmithing. Um, went to started my online course with Sonoran Desert Institute
Mhm.
to go through their certification process to become a gunsmith. And I just finished that actually on the 25th of May, and I am now a completed certified gunsmith. And just waiting to obtain my FFL license to officially kick business off the ground there. And uh, one thing I can say, I'm always doing. I never stop.
Yeah.
Um, I always have to have something to do, and I've kind of gotten back into the dog world a little bit, helping a couple local departments here close by with continuing their canine program and starting out some new dogs. And I work with a vendor down in North Carolina, and just work close with him, placing dogs, moving dogs around. Um, and I'm still on the board of directors for a state organization here in West Virginia Canine Search and Rescue Incorporated, that does search and rescue operations and human remains discovery type things. So I'm still in the dog world, but not as much as I used to be.
Matt, growing up in West Virginia, it seems like it will be a natural outdoors paradise. I'm in southwestern PA, and I spend a lot of time down in West Virginia around the Morgantown area growing up, and things like that. And like, what drew you into community service? You mentioned you were, a volunteer fireman, EMS, law enforcement. As a very young man, what drew you into that service?
So honestly, growing up, my dad, he was in the volunteer fire service long before I was born, and he got out of it uh, not long after I was born. But so a lot of his friends and a lot of my mentors growing up were in the fire service and the first responder field. A lot of them were both firefighters and cops. So I that I lived in the world before I even got into the world. So it was just something that always drew me to it. And I always wanted to go into the military. And I know Mike's got a military background uh, prior to his enforcement career. But I couldn't do the military because I was colorblind. So it kind of prohibited me from doing a lot of things in the military that I would have actually liked to do.
Yeah.
Um, but growing up, I was just very active, sports, 4-H, just community based things that drove helping the community, being involved in the community. Um, my entire family, um, surround, not even just close family, but um, cousins and uncles and everything like that. They're involved in the medical field. It's in some form or fashion. I have a cousin that's a flight nurse. I have her husband used to be a flight medic, and he actually runs the EMS agency that I started out with. My mom was a nurse. So it's kind of always been, I've always lived in it. Like I said, my mentors were in it. Um, my mentors that got me into law enforcement and helped push me into law enforcement were most of the guys that I was on the fire department with before I actually got into law enforcement. And I got into the volunteer fire department right out of high school. So that was where I first started out at.
It's one of those things, man. You kind of live what you know, and service roles are those things you're called to. We're never going to be compensated well enough for the jobs that we do and all the stuff that we see and put up with, and it's not for
Absolutely.
kudos. And so I don't know anybody that goes into it and says I'm gonna put a badge on because I want everybody to pat me on the back. It's one of those things you want to make a change. And Mac, you're still making those changes, dude, and that's what I've always loved about your energy. You're nonstop. You want to keep giving back to the K9 community and to West Virginia and the people around you. And I have multiple questions, but one of them, dude, as a quadriplegic and a gunsmith, how difficult was that course, man?
Uh, Honestly, if I went into full detail with it, we could sit here for days and talk about it. Um, I it's crazy. It's honestly crazy for me to sit here and think about of when I first started the course and my
Mhm.
thoughts going into it, and now my thoughts looking back at it. Um, Going into it, I had no idea how I was going to make it to the end. I didn't
Right,
know. I because you know I can ask references. I can ask the instructors on, hey, what does this entail?
right,
But they can only tell me from their side, and they can only tell me from their able body side.
correct.
So, me sitting here, it's very overwhelming to think about um, going into that, and it would be for anybody in our world. But honestly, I mean, it wasn't the hardest, but it definitely wasn't the easiest. A lot of things that seem easy in your mind were generally the hardest tasks to overcome. It's the simple things, small pieces. I learned that I stray away from working on handguns because they require more small pieces, fine details, smaller springs. So that's one of the things that I try to stay away from as hard as I possibly can.
Yeah,
But even just rifles in general, the, everything has small pieces. Everything has a way that it has to go together, and the tools are set up to use one way, and you have to figure out how to use it another way that works for you. And I deal with one hand that operates at about 40%, and the other one doesn't operate. It's basically just there for looks.
right.
But
Mac, you bring up a good point though about learning how to do things your way. And I know I've talked to you in the past about specialty gun vices and different tools that you adapt it to be able to hold the rifle and things. You want to expand on maybe some of the vices and tools that you use to make it a little bit easier for yourself?
yeah, so honestly, I use all the same tools that anybody else would use doing the jobs. The way that I use them is totally opposite what anybody would uh, think about how to use them. I There's a lot of times that I'll use pieces of wooden dowel rods to hold pieces while I fasten a fastener in, like the magazine release on an AR platform. You have to insert the spring into the hole and you have to hold that. you have to hold that button in while
Mhm.
you screw it in from the other side. So I have to use a wooden dowel in my mouth and hold that in while I insert the and screw in the other side of that component. Um, you know, trying to drive in roll pins,
Mhm.
holding punches with this hand and hammering with this hand and trying to figure out how to, sometimes you got to get it started before you ever get the other piece that you're trying to hold in there.
Yeah.
So, and then, just like the torque wrenches and stuff for installing an AR barrel nut. Um, that's a it's a balancing act for me because you have to balance the actual wrench and then put the torque wrench in and do it that way. But the main vise that I use is a um, a drill press vise that sits on the platform of a drill press that's lays
Right.
flat on the table. I use that just sitting flat on my desk that I can hold pieces into just on the desk solid, and spin it around just so it's super heavy. So it gives me the ability of having that second hand that I don't have. Um, I mean, like I said, I use regular screwdrivers, regular T-handle, Torx wrenches. Screwdrivers are pretty hard because I don't have the hand grip and the
Right.
hand function to grab them and actually get that torque that I need. So there's a lot of times I find myself using a set of channel locks
Mhm.
on those to grab the handle and get the leverage on them, or um, I'll I'll use my mouth.
Right.
So I use a lot of magnets because I drop a lot of things in the floor.
Yeah.
I use kitchen tongs. I'll use kitchen tongs to pick stuff up out of the floor all the time, and I spend more time looking for things that I drop than
Right.
I
Right.
actually spend working on the guns.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
it's always fun and games, man. We get people with different disabilities on these podcasts, and we get to talking. I always joke around and say the pairs, man, they're only partially paralyzed. You know, they got their hands. They're a bunch of cheaters. We're having to fight it out, man. And I always joke around. I keep telling my wife, I said, if I lose my teeth, I'm really gonna be in trouble because 9 times out of 10, that's my gripping device, man. And I'll grab onto something and hold it tight. And
Absolutely.
then you got to be as a quadriplegic in a chair, you're gonna have to be part MacGyver. So we duct tape and zip tie and use any and everything we
There,
can.
I find myself a lot of times going to grab the roll of masking tape to hold parts
Yeah,
in place while I'm doing something, or uh, just literally anything that I
right.
can find to hold something. Uh, and I was talking to somebody the other day. I was like, I got to replace some of my tools because I use some of my tools not how they're intended to be used, and they
Right.
get bent or uh,
Sure.
they wear out a lot faster. So
But when people think about assistive technology, Mac, they may not think tape or Velcro or kitchen tongs is assistive tech. But when you're actually using it day to day, anything can be assistive technology if it gives you an advantage and helps you through the course of that project build. I don't know how many times I use a pencil. As you guys said, I can't push certain buttons with my finger or things like that. And I'll put a little duct tape on the end of a pencil and push it. And my dentist probably loves me because I'm the same way as you guys. We're using our mouth to do a lot of things to, grip things and pull on things. And if I don't have the strength in my arms, a lot of times to open a door, I'll put a dog leash on it and then, pull it with my teeth and my jaw and that kind of thing. So we make it work with what we got.
I tell you to touch on that, Greg. My last my last course for SDI, it was modern sporting rifles, and we had to choose a platform to build an entire gun. And I chose an AR-10 308 platform rifle
Right.
to build. Um, but a brand new gun, the springs are brand new, they're stiff. The parts that they send you are very basic, so they don't have a lot of the things that I can utilize to actually function that rifle throughout its operations. And
Right.
I actually I have a backup gun that I used for a lot of the projects during that. And I had it beforehand. It's actually my daughter's, but it so we actually had to go through the cycle of operations of the AR platform for one of our projects. And the rifle that they sent us just had a regular charging handle on it with
Right.
hardly no grip on it at all. But the other rifle I have had an ambidextrous charging handle with holes in it. So to cycle that rifle, I put a shoestring through both of those holes in the charging handle, and I pulled it back with my mouth to cycle it in the
Right.
video.
Right.
And
Yes, sir.
my instructor, he mentioned it after later on in the course after he graded it, and he made a comment about how interesting it was the way that I found to do things to get through these projects, and that he would have never imagined that
Right.
he doesn't see that all the time. And he said it was very eye-opening to him as to how much drive that I had to complete the assignment. And
Right.
but like Greg said, tying a dog leash to the door to close it behind you or whatever, I use a resistance band and loop it around the door and go out the door so it can, stretch out to give me the room to get out the door, and then I can pull it behind me, and that's how I close my doors. So
Yes, sir.
there, if you don't know how to MacGyver things in this life, you're going to be severely behind.
Right.
We
It's funny you said that. You hit a spot just a minute ago, Mac. You were talking about going back to school and able-bodied folks trying to figure us out. I'm back in school and I fully feel you on that. And they only know what they know, and so they don't know our life. How do you know it if you don't live it?
And the
And
thing is, Mike, I think and I'm not going to cut you off for very long. I think the biggest thing from our standpoint is not being afraid to reach out to those people
100%. Yeah.
and explain the situation and explain what you need, because I had to do that many times with my instructors throughout the course,
Right.
because we had on our video assignments, they wanted it cut to a certain time, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes.
Right.
Us, what would take somebody else 8 minutes takes us 20, 30 minutes.
Right.
So yes, we can go in and edit that video down and cut out all the dead spots, but we still can't get it down to 8 minutes. So there was a
Right.
lot of times that I had to reach out to those instructors and ask, like, hey, like, here's my situation. I cut it down as far as I absolutely could and worked as fast as I could.
Yeah.
Can you work with me on the time limit here? And, honestly, they were very good to work with. None of them ever had a problem with it. But you just can't be afraid to put yourself out there in that situation and
Yep.
ask for, a little bit of assistance and
Right.
leniency on, hard set um,
Time
deadlines.
limits.
Yep, yep,
That's one of the things I was getting ready to say. It's all about communication, and they don't
absolutely.
know what they don't know. And so if we don't open up an empathetic dialogue where we can tell them, "Hey, I'm not asking for a handout. What I'm looking for is I'm gonna do everything, and I want to be independent. I want to do this
Absolutely.
course myself." And so I'm having to do similar stuff like that with writing papers. And the way I have to write it takes me 3 times as long, because I can't chicken pick on my laptop. So I'm having to type everything on my phone, then upload it to Word, and then put it in APA format. It's not an excuse. That's just the reality of the
Absolutely.
game,
If
Right.
if
So
it
just
wasn't for
awareness.
talk to talk to text on my, because I before I went once I got back into school, I actually upgraded to a Mac computer,
Yeah,
um just to, because everything else I have is Apple, so I just remained on that line. I knew how to use it, but if it wasn't for speak to type, uh I would have been lost for
Yep.
writing papers, because you know some would be surprised, but throughout this gunsmith program, we did more writing than we did working on guns.
right.
Um, and me, I haven't done any writing from since I graduated high school, and that was 11 years ago. So, I had to take it back and learn how to write papers again. But the typing aspect, I only have one, you know, my finger sticks out and I can't bend it. So I type with one finger, or I
Right.
fight talk to speak because of my accent. But I, it helps you type a lot faster than uh, the one little finger
Oh,
hunting and
chicken pig.
pecking. Yeah,
Definitely using voice to text is a godsend. And now that everyone can use it, we're no longer being forced to purchase Dragon Naturally Speaking or Dragon Dictate, that was a added software for people with disabilities, because it's more mainstream on our phones and iPads and even on our laptops now. Voice to text works so much better, even with an accent Mac, or people that don't talk like newscasters, that have a little bit more conversational speech. It's so much easier to use voice to text now. That's a really good point. Um,
as long as you're professional, because it will pick up on the unprofessional parts.
right,
Oh,
right.
yes.
And you definitely want to be aware of the microphone when it's on and when it's not. Um,
Absolutely.
I've used voice to text for 26 years. I've used it as you guys did in school, and getting my master's, and it's really a learning process. And as you mentioned, talking with your instructors, Mac, you have to be kind of diplomatic about people, how you approach them, and ask for this extra time and assistance. Even though, we're still doing all the same work, it will take us longer, but we need to come across as professional and kind of justify why we need the extra time. And I've always found that,
Absolutely.
being a little bit diplomatic and explaining things to people, they get it right away. And it's not, as Mike always says, a hand up, out, it's a hand up.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing, you know, and speaking from my side, and I know you guys are very like-minded, I try everything that I can to present myself as a normal human being. I'm
Right.
no different than anybody else. And I think that, when it comes down to it, as long as you can be on the same level with somebody and approach it with respect and confidence and lay out the facts of what you need and why you need it,
Hmm.
um, that and especially in a school setting, there's no reason that everybody can't be professional in that setting, because
Right.
you're all trying to get to that same goal. Your instructors and professors are wanting you to provide them good solid work, and you are wanting to provide them with good solid work, and
Correct.
you're working towards the same aspect, but your challenges are different than every other video that they're seeing. And when I went into my program, my intake person, I asked him, I said, you know, how feasible is this going to be for me to complete this? And they straight up said, I don't know,
Right.
because they don't know.
Sure.
And he said, and word for word, I can tell you that at one point we had a blind individual complete this course.
Right.
After that conversation, I sat back and I thought to myself, I said, if that person can complete this course,
Hmm.
I can complete this course.
Yes, sir.
It's not going to be easy, but if they can do it without being able to see, I can do it without being able to move parts of my body.
Right. It gets back to advocacy, guys. It's about opening up a channel of communication, not only for ourselves, because we're not going to be the first person to go to school. We're not going to be the last. But it opens up an opportunity where we can kind of instruct the instructors. They like to be challenged as well. And then as soon as you open up and you say, these are the accommodations that I think would help me, they may even have accommodations we hadn't even seen on the disability front. I'm seeing that more in school too, with all the different technologies that are coming out, the AI formats, what they're letting us use in the PhD programs, because they're so worried about, anybody with plagiarism. And so we have to really watch that format of it. But man, the technology is really branched out. But it gets right back down to brass tacks. It's about, hey, if we don't know how to fix it, let's work together to make it right so that you're
Absolutely.
not the only guy we see in a chair. Maybe there'll be other people right behind us.
And I think that's the biggest, going into it, I really worried about the writing aspect because I
Right.
hadn't done it for so long.
Yeah.
Um, and they really, really stressed the plagiarism aspect and all of that. And, their system set up that every submission, like every paper submission, is run through a software that checks it for, because everything's online now. If you Google
Yep.
something that somebody else has done pops up.
Yeah.
And it would be super easy just to copy and paste what they did and put it right into your thing and submit it. And theirs will go back and it will check, and you can actually look it up on their system as to who used it when they used that
Right.
exact point. And if it was in the past, they're not super worried about it, but and or if it's just a piece here and there, but your citations and everything really count
There
in
you
that
go.
Sure.
situation. And but honestly, if you can't do it without like chat GBT or AI, then you're really not in it for the right reasons because you're not learning anything
Right.
and you're cutting yourself short. And
Yeah.
I get that those softwares are out there and they're great for some things, but when you're actually in a educational aspect,
To
if you can't
learn.
if you can't do it without it, then you're cutting yourself short and you're basically wasting your instructor's time and your time.
Yeah.
Mac, I want to change gears a little bit with being an entrepreneur and a business owner. I know whenever you've been injured, you've had other business in the past or canine training and things. How is it setting up a business, a for-profit as a person with a disability? Was your community pretty accepting? Have you had any issues with starting your business, or how did that go for you?
Well, Greg, I'll take it back to if we sat here and talked about this for very long, we'd be here all day. But so when I first started my canine business, um, that it started very small, very slow. Whenever I took the jump into commercially operating my business, I moved into a commercial facility and ran it by the books and never had any problems until it just got too much, with the disability, finding somebody to, for transportation in the morning to be at a place at a certain time, and then come back home in the evening, get all your responsibilities done here. With the disability, we have a disability routine. We have, shower, our bathroom routines, and all of that. And I kept 3, 4 dogs at home myself. So you get home and you have to deal with all of that. You got to, just your life responsibilities. And, that aspect cut into what I was able to get done in a work aspect just because of time. Um, so I looked into, I started moving everything back to my house to train, at my private residence where I didn't have to leave all of that, and ran into zoning restrictions. So um, that kind of that tied me up for a very long time, and eventually led to me backing out of the dog industry just because of frustration and uh, it wore me down enough that I just couldn't do it anymore, and I lost the mindset to uh, it wasn't fun anymore. Um,
Sure.
so once my other business, my private investigation process service business, that's just run out of my house. So I don't really have any bad restrictions with that because all of it's online or done away from home. The next, my gunsmithing business, that has been a challenge because with the FFL process, you have to meet your local and state zoning regulations. And
Right.
so I had to go in front of my county zoning board and ask for approval of operating this business out of my house because I had to notify all my neighbors that were within so many feet of my property line. Um, I'm in a zoning area that's zoned forest and recreation, so they don't commercial businesses or a no-no. And um, with the the gunsmith stuff, safety is a big thing with that. So I had to amend my business operations. I can't go out here in the yard and do a bunch of test firing of a rifle. I can't. Um, we have a thing. We can't. What is it? Like chemicals, fumes. We can't have a.
Right.
I can't have a lot of that on site. I can't use a lot of that because it could disturb my neighbors. Um, you know, Storage of ammunition.
Yeah.
That's a big one. I amended my business profile to, as needed. That's a special order thing. I don't keep multiple. I don't keep a lot of I won't keep a lot of firearms on site for the general public. That's a special order thing.
Yeah.
I will run my business by appointment only so that I don't have people just in and out because of the traffic aspect. There's because they didn't, my neighbors didn't want a bunch of guns because of the crime aspect of somebody knowing that it's here and breaking in.
Right.
Sure.
Now we live in an area that's and to kind of be biased, people know who I am, and that's probably not going to happen. But
Right.
and I'm one to keep a dog that will prevent that from happening around. But um, so there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But now I've kind of came to a situation in the last couple months where I've been dealing with Medicaid, and having these businesses registered to me in my uh, personal profits and
Right.
assets. So that has pushed me to start moving things into a trust, a business trust.
Yeah.
That's what is holding me up on filing for my FFLs. I'm trying to get everything restructured into a trust, and I've just recently they had a problem with how many vehicles that I had. Doesn't matter if they're disability oriented or not, they don't
Right.
care. It's over your asset limit. So
Right.
I've been moving vehicles into a trust to get those personal assets off just to meet the Medicaid standards and asset limits. So it if I had to make one statement is probably think ahead before you start down this a business road, and plan it
Right.
out right the first time so you don't have to go back and do it again, because that's at the spot that I am, and it's very frustrating and very time consuming, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through to make it right. So making sure it's done right the first time to where it won't hinder your medical benefits from the state or federally is the biggest thing, because that's what we rely on the most, because
Right.
we can't, and I won't say we, but I personally can't run a business to support my full lifestyle every
Right.
day. So I still do depend on those federal and state benefits, especially the insurance side, and with the wheelchairs and medical bills and
Absolutely.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Someone in our situation cannot run a business full force without multiple employees on a big scale, and most of us aren't looking to run a business on a big full
Right.
scale like that. So just planning it out and knowing your state, federal, and local guidelines would be the biggest thing that I could push on that, because it's been a headache to try to go back and change a lot of this stuff over.
Man, Mac, you bring up a laundry list of stuff that people are going to be attuned to in this podcast. From how much work it takes for us just to get to work. We have to get up and we're 2 hours into getting up, showering. whatever bioroutines we've got
We're
just to get to
we're
work.
tired. We're tired. We can put in a work day before we get to work.
Exactly,
That's right.
and we joke around about it, but it literally takes a mountain of work just to get to work. And then, we got all these regulations and we joke around about it. But it is an uphill battle for people with paraplegia, quadriplegia that want to get back into working full time. They have the desire, they have all these things, but then we're kind of pigeonholed and we can be overeducated, underemployed, and then a lot of times we're held back, and that's just the reality. I mean, it's a talking point, yes. It's something we need to push more and more on. And then we've got guys like you, Mac, that are out there, and you're having to go through these realms, but you're able to talk to other people through it. And I've kind of done it the same way, doing trust. You have to do it when you get into marriage with a disability. You can't share assets and man, I mean, there's a laundry list. We could go on and on
And
just
that's where I come up with the point. If we were to start down this road, we could sit here all day and talk about this. And that's the crazy side. And obviously, everybody's is different, state to
sure.
state, county to county, and it it's a lot to think about. And it's a lot to take in. And it's a lot to plan
Mhm.
out. But it's going to be more beneficial to you in the end because you're not going to have to go back and change a lot of things, and you're not going to end
Right.
up in the struggles that you would if you didn't do it right. Which I'm not in any struggles, but I'm now trying to revert things to meet
Yeah.
guidelines and
Navigate.
yeah. So um, it that it it makes it hard on, and it discourages people in our uh, lifestyle to not pursue things because
Yes.
of not wanting to mess up those benefits and stuff, because it's so time consuming to work around them, and it's
Yeah.
not just cut and dry.
Right.
It may be cut and dry on the online website, but once you get into it, it's absolutely not cut and dry whatsoever.
And Mac, it's definitely barriers to being successful. And I'll just say as well, we have medical conditions that change on a weekly, monthly, daily basis that sooner or later we're going to have a UTI, we're going to have a pressure wound, we're going to have things that stop us from working for weeks or months at a time. And not having that safety net of insurance or Medicare or Medicaid underneath you, that's scary. I mean, that is
Absolutely.
really scary that you would lose your benefits because you're trying to better yourself with working and you're limited on the amount of assets that you can have and hold. There's just so many barriers to full time employment. I think you're absolutely doing everything you can to be a productive member of your community. And I just, I'm so proud to know you and everything you're doing. I want to switch gears again because we're getting a little deep in the weeds into our podcast, but I know that you have a great family and a young daughter. And what are some of the things that you like to do that aren't work or aren't related that way? Like, what are some of the pursuits that you guys do as a family to get out and enjoy life just like everyone else?
In that realm of things, really my main my main support is my mom and my sister. And I've talked about him, and you guys know who he is, Matt Miller. Guy I started out my archery pursuit with, and
Yeah.
he's really close with us, and he's around all the time, and he helps out doing just as much. So that's my main support, and I've got a couple friends, but um, you know outside of work and school, which I haven't really had much of a life until May 25th because I've been glued to a computer or my workbench. Um, so, but I mean, summertime really revolves around Ava's schedule, which is my little one, and we just try to get outside and spend as much time outside doing what she wants to do when she's here because throughout the winter it's cold and I don't like to go out and do anything. So
Right.
winter time keeps us held up, and inside, but she's only here, for one full day during the winter on every other weekend. So summertime is our really big time to have a good substantial amount of time with her, and just we uh we go by the tune of her own drum on that one, because she keeps us busy, and she likes to be at the river. She likes to be around water. She got into our state, started putting like these memorial swings out at like different iconic locations around West Virginia. In the past 2 summers, she has gotten into locating as many of those as she can uh, on different trips, and we'll kind of base our summer trips around finding those. And
Yeah.
mom, on her trips back and forth to home, they'll stop and visit one here and there, and so she just keeps us on the go and busy. And I've got the dogs, and I kind of, when she's not here, I have to take a break and mentally restructure myself after she's been here, because it's kind of like a category 5 hurricane when she's here. And
Yeah, man.
it's time to get the house back in order while she's gone, and uh, retrain the dogs from their bad habits they picked up while she's here, and get caught up on, just my business stuff. Like I said, I'm still doing the process service stuff. So I've got I've gotten to where I use mostly private contractors with that, of people that I know around the state. So I pass things off on them, so I don't actually have to go do them. And I just do the paperwork side. But now with the gunsmithing thing evolving, I don't really know what that aspect of business is going to look like, and I don't know how busy it's going to be. I was actually sitting here the other day thinking about hunting season, and how that seems like it's going to have went out the window for working on people's guns during that process, and getting them, keeping them out in the field. So I've been trying to figure out a way to figure out how to uh, acquire a deer this year. So
Yeah. It seems like work, man. We put ourselves in these positions where we want to keep going, we want to do, we got drive to keep going, but then work gets in the way of play, and then that's just the nature of the beast, man. But kind of like what Greg said, we're blessed. The three of us were able to jump right back
absolutely.
into stuff with our injuries, and we all got to go to Shepherd Center. And anybody listening to this thing that knows anybody with a spinal cord injury, if there were a newer injury, get them into a rehab facility like a Shepherd or a Craig, because those guys really pour into whatever your nuances are. They know how to push you, they know how to get you back. They want to harbor whatever your passions are. But man, Mac, you said it, dude. Kids keep us growing strong. My daughter was 18 months old when I got hurt, and she didn't see any different than dad. Dad rolled different, but hey, it doesn't matter. It's time to play, and
And
she's gonna keep me going.
And to
That's right.
touch on that, my little one, she turned a year old the day after I got shot. Um,
Right.
so she was very young. She doesn't know me outside of a wheelchair. Um,
Same.
but honestly, hey, stop. Uh, she will pick and harass on me, uh, just like anybody else will, and that is she doesn't care.
Right.
I had a toe amputated a couple years ago, and she still picks on me that I only have 9 toes.
Dude,
So
I've only
she
got nine
makes
kids too,
she
and
makes the best of it.
you got to laugh about things, and kids don't care, and that's great that she can joke with you and give you the business, and she's not afraid of your disability. That's all she knows. You're just dad, you know.
And that, I think, and to go back on something else that Mike said, somebody that's newly injured getting into a rehab facility, um, uh, to get pushed in the right direction, because those people know how to do it. But I think another aspect of being at Shepherd was you know, I had my daughter there for several long periods of time
Right.
throughout my stay there. And, the nurses and doctors would come in and address her first because
Correct.
she would have a playpen set up and she would have all her stuff out. And they would address her first and play with her and talk to her and interact with her before they ever would me.
Right.
And when she wasn't there, they were asking how she was and this.
Sure.
It's more, the Shepherd Center was more of a family environment than it was a medical facility in terms. And um, but another thing to touch on would be, in our aspect, there are people in our position that get discouraged, get down, and don't allow themselves to explore anything further than being hurt, and
Yeah.
they get down on themselves and dwell on that aspect of, no, we're not the same anymore.
Yeah.
But mentally we still can be,
Sure.
outside of individuals with brain injuries and stuff. We are still the same people that we were. We just have to do things a lot different. And one thing that has been a big part of, my progression and something that I keep myself involved in is staying around like-minded people.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
You and Greg, we're all beating to the same drum. We still strive to do the things that we were doing before our accidents. But, with the gunsmith side of things, I still put myself around law enforcement. I still put
Sure.
myself around outdoorsmen. I still put myself in with the private investigation and process service world. I'm still putting myself around people that, you know, I'm putting myself around people that are avoiding, uh, what do you call it? The laws and restrictions.
Right.
They're avoiding court. They're avoiding, you know, yeah, just to stay around that. And with the archery world, I shot archery before I got hurt, so that was fun. I haven't shot a crossbow in years since then, and but
Once
there's
you
been
win
a
a
lot of
world
other
champ,
things going
once you win a world championship, Mac, everything's kind of downhill after that.
on. You
You uh,
know,
you didn't
after the
shoot archery,
fame.
brother. You were world champion at 3D. So that's something that I always remember and think about you is, talking to you and hearing that you won the worlds. And I was just so proud of you just because you made it happen. You and Matt together, you were an avid outdoorsman, but you had never really shot much 3D before that. And you had a
I'd
goal in
shot a
mind.
lot. I'd shot 3D a good bit before that, but it was with able body and a compound bow and not a crossbow. Up
Right.
until the
Right.
time that I started uh, into the archery world and my disability, that was the first time I'd ever fired a crossbow. So, I mean,
Right.
you know, a lot of people think it's the same as shooting a gun, and it is absolutely not
Nah.
even close,
Right.
especially in a disability standpoint because of trying to figure out how to do it. And you have to have somebody else there to cock it and
There you go.
prepare it to fire and, get it set up. And, there's so many things to it with, how you're using it. At that point, I was, uh, I was shooting out of a power chair.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Now I have a track chair now, and it's still not completely set up the way that I need it to, and
Right.
it's
Right.
still I haven't been in it for probably a year now,
Right.
but life gets in the way, and
It
you
does.
pulled 3, 4 different ways, and go back to school and end up in a different adventure, and I'm always finding a different adventure to be in. Mostly I'm just a nuisance on Facebook to our local
Nah.
and county local and county government, and I've been stirring the pot the last few days myself, and uh, I try to keep them true to themselves.
That's
Well,
right.
Mac, you bringing it full circle, man, because here's the kicker. It goes right back to advocacy. It goes back to get on with life. It goes back to where we can talk about our injuries, how Shepherd Center boosted us up. You said something earlier, man, that you find out truly who your friends are. And these injuries are very taxing. They're taxing on us, but they're
Absolutely.
very taxing on our family and friends. And so your circles get real tight. And then, the disability world's a very small world. It can get very dark and negative if you allow it to. But if we can get around like-minded people and we figure out new ways to do old tasks that we love to do, that's what these podcasts and that's what this stuff's meant to be about. It's just, it's not about kudos for any one person. It's highlighting people that are just not letting life stop them.
I think that's a big aspect too, is, a lot of the things that I've done, and I'll touch on this. I recently passed, it was last year, but I had a friend of mine that works in EMS in
Mhm.
a different county, and he reached out to me because he knew of a family that was uh, being discouraged from obtaining a service dog for their son. Their son, he was 2 years old, and he was diagnosed with epilepsy. So, they were fresh into the world. He was hooked up to machine, at night all the time. They couldn't go camping because they were worried about his medical equipment functioning and all of this. And he asked me if I could help them because they were told from three different service dog vendors, that they could not be placed with a service dog until the child was 14 years old. And, I took that a little personal from,
Absolutely.
both the disability world, but also from a canine world, because
Mhm.
it's not acceptable. Because the canine world in the disability side of things is it's geared a lot towards vendors benefiting financially instead of actually helping individuals. And so, I spent a lot of time reaching out to different vendors and locating one for them that was closer to them, because they're in the northern part of the state. So I found, and I would have to look it up, but I found a vendor up in Pennsylvania, and it was a family run business. The owner of it currently, her mom ran the business for 40 or 50 years, before she took it over, and she took it directly over from her mom, and she struggles with some disabilities herself. But they they structure their business to uh, mainly operate with families with children, and younger adults. But they utilize a prison dog program, and they uh, take their dogs and put them in the prison first and let them get
Yeah.
their foundations and do their basic stuff. And then, once they have an application for somebody, they they pick out the dogs that they think will be suitable for that individual, and they will, start the process from there. And um, they don't require money up front. They help you with obtaining grants and doing fundraiser stuff, throughout the period of time that you're in the waiting list and the training time. So this family was able to recently get placed with a service dog for their now 3 year old son with epilepsy, and they're still going through the training. But, and um, that's something to look back on, because I could care less about any recognition from it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want, like, that's something I don't want. I could care less about anything, because, it helps me more being able to help somebody than it does ever gaining anything from it, which I gain nothing from it other than the gratification of being able to help them through it.
Yeah.
This
Um,
satisfaction of helping others, that goes a long way, Mac, and it gets us out of our own head. And the ability to help our community is so valuable. Mike and I see it all the time with the people that we talk with in the community and around the country. So thank you for not taking no for an answer, for finding a vendor that was willing to work with that family
Absolutely.
and making that happen. Um, Mac, I really want to have you back on our podcast. We're going to have to wrap things up, but I wanted to
That
give
sounds
you
good.
I wanted to give you the last word, brother. And how about telling people where they can get a hold of you and any parting thoughts?
And touch on that. I can send you all the links to the social media or whatever, but and social media is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I do have a BSquared gunsmithing business page. I have on Facebook. I have a YouTube for BSquared Gunsmithing that I started. I do have a dot link to my business contact stuff that I can send you. My personal stuff is on Facebook as well. I'll send you all the links. Mac Brackenrich on Facebook, BSquared Gunsmithing LLC on Facebook.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, I'll get you guys the links for those if you don't have them.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to get a hold of me or get in touch. I have email links to on both of those pages as well. Um, so, uh, but yeah, I think there's a lot more we could touch on and spend a lot more time on. So, um, I think that it's it's a very evolving world of change that we
Right.
live in, and not allowing yourself to follow a path that you're interested in is a disadvantage to you. Um, and any advantage that you can get in this lifestyle is an advantage towards your mental health and physical health, because staying active and staying focused on something keeps us out of those dark places that we tend to find sometimes. And
Yeah.
um, I'm not a big one for any type of structured therapy sessions myself, but I find my therapy in helping others, and you know pushing myself to do things that I may not have 6 months ago, or something
Yeah.
that I think that I can't do. So I find my therapy in doing those things to where I can stay motivated and moving forward instead of focusing on the past and those dark places. So I think that
Right.
anybody in that can find that same mindset will benefit from that fully. And not talking bad about therapy at all, because it is very beneficial. Um, I've just not been a part of any type of structured therapy that has provided me with the positive mental uh, outlook and push that I get from the other things that I do. And
Sure.
so it's all on how you look at it and on how you move forward with it and process it. So
To piggyback off what Greg was saying, Mac, I truly appreciate your friendship, man, and I appreciate you
absolutely,
absolutely taking your time to come on and be able to share. You're a wealth of knowledge, man. You're always on the go. I dig that about you, man. I always have. And we'll have to definitely get you back on because there's a lot of subjects we got to touch on, and just the last one you hit on. We're all individual. There's a ton
absolutely,
of tools out there, and so whatever works for each person, that's what we have to do. We all fire a firearm different. We all use different technology. We all go to counseling different. My therapy is
absolutely,
sitting in the woods or getting it behind a fishing pole. So, we
absolutely.
have to find what works for us. But man, thank you so much for your time, dude. I know you're wide open.